Hello again. In this, the third section of our package, we're going to look at some of the issues around using evidence-based practice. Theory is one thing, practice is another, as we all know. So let's start by considering some of the barriers to using EBP. I know, it's a negative approach, but we have to know what they are if we can work out how to deal with them. So just think for a minute about the barriers that might affect you. What is it that gets in the way of you using evidence-based practice routinely in your workplace? When we look at the literature and in talking with other speech pathologists, we've found a number of issues have been identified as potentially affecting the ability to use evidence-based practice. We've put some of these on the slide for you to have a look at. So let's talk about a couple of them. Time is always an issue. Unfortunately, we can't give you extra hours in your day, but we do hope that you'll come up with some strategies to help you to deal with that, and we've got a couple to suggest as well. Resources can be an issue as well. Where you get hold of them, it's one thing knowing they're out there, but getting hold of them can be difficult. Your knowledge of evidence-based practice should be increased by engaging with this package. The organisational culture is something which is difficult to change, but it's worth making the effort to do that. You'll need to talk with other people in your workplace in order to start a shift in the organisational culture. Or maybe all you need to do is to get on the bandwagon with the people who are already engaging in this. Resistance to change can come from within or without. If you're resistant to change, then there's a need to work on yourself, to think about what you can gain and what you can gain for your clients through engaging in evidence-based practice. Resistance to change can come from without, from the organisation, from the hierarchies in which you work. I guess the answer to this problem is small and slow. So it's worth persevering with your own focus on evidence-based practice, and it's worth advocating with your workplaces. Some workplaces, I suspect, pay lip service to evidence-based practice, see it as a good thing, but don't follow up with practical aid in the form of time to spend. I'm not going to go through the rest of the barriers that have come up. You might like to think about them a little more. To summarise our talk about barriers, Scott, Delmar, Hoffman and Bennett said that we can categorise the barriers into three main areas: skills, time and attitude. Skills, we're aiming to help you develop in this package. Time, we've talked about. Can't give you time, can suggest ways for you to work smart. Attitude is down to you completely, and I'd like to suggest that it's a mindset. There's no doubt that there are barriers, but if you develop a mindset that says evidence-based practice is my clinical responsibility, it will help. So let's look at some possible solutions. I'm not going to give you the solutions because solutions that might work for me won't necessarily work for you. Solutions that will work for other people won't necessarily work for you either. So I want you to spend a little bit of time now looking at your list of barriers and brainstorming for yourself some solutions that might work. You might like to engage with a colleague as well. Talk to someone else about the barriers that you face and ask them whether they've found ways to address those barriers. Evidence-based practice, as we noted earlier in this package, isn't just a reliance on the research evidence, although the research is important, of course. There's also a process involved, and it's the process that we're going to talk about now. I want to state up front that we often think about evidence-based practice as it relates to intervention, and that's probably mostly what I'm going to be talking about throughout the rest of this package. But it's worth remembering that we can also access the evidence for our practice in terms of assessment and in terms of prognosis for our clients. We're going to look now at the process that it's suggested is involved, and we're going to take a couple of different ways of looking at it. So, the process is said to require 5 steps. And this looks a lot like a process that's around the research evidence, as indeed it is. But I'd like to challenge you as you look at each step to think about where the other 2 aspects of evidence-based practice fit. Remember, those other 2 aspects are best evidence related to internal clinical practice and best evidence related to the preferences of a fully informed client. As you can see, the 5 steps start with formulating a well-built question. So you have to know what the question is that you want to answer if you're going to find the answer in the research evidence. Secondly, you need to identify the evidence-based resources that answer the question. I sometimes wonder about this particular point as it's made in the literature. I wonder whether we can ever find evidence-based resources that fully answer the question. I like to think of it as looking for evidence-based resources that address the question. A fine point, I know, semantic picking, but that's our job, isn't it, as speech pathologists? We need to think about the words. The third aspect is critically appraising the evidence to assess its validity. We're going to look shortly at some ways of critically appraising evidence and ask you to do some practice in doing this. Steps 4 and 5 require you to apply the evidence within your clinical practice and then evaluate the evidence. We're not going to look very much at these last 2 points because they're related to what you do in your workplace. A different way of looking at this process is to use a number of A words. Ask, access, appraise, apply, and audit. I think you can see how they fit with the 5 steps of the process that we discussed previously. As you engage in the process, I think it's worth remembering that as speech pathologists, we face a challenge that's not present in medicine, in evidence-based medicine. In evidence-based medicine, the question might be, does a drug work or does it not work? That's all you need to know. It's a yes-no question. We can't do that in speech pathology. We need to ask, as Nan Bernstein-Ratner reminds us, whether our interventions work for different groups of people, in what setting it works, and how it works. So we have to be thinking a little bit wider than the yes-no question, does it work? Here are 2 links that you can follow to learn a little bit more about the process. Some of the terminology is a little bit different, but both are worth looking at to further develop your understandings of the process of evidence-based practice. Once you've had a look at these sites, come back and we'll begin together on section 4. We'll take a look at how to formulate a question for evidence-based practice.